I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened at Max's graduation just a few days ago. Honestly, it was a train wreck, but also a revelation. My ex-wife, Sarah, she just decided to blow everything wide open, right there, in front of everyone. It was mortifying, chaotic, and somehow, a huge relief. We were all at the football stadium. You know, that big, bustling scene with hundreds of families, everyone cheering, trying to find their kids in a sea of caps and gowns. I'd saved a block of seats, for my parents, my sister Jessica and her family, and of course, for Sarah and her husband, Robert. She shows up like 20 minutes before the ceremony starts, already in a mood. Barely a nod to my folks, just these little passive-aggressive jabs. And then, when Max's name was called, she leaned over to my mom and practically hissed, so proud of the son I raised, despite everything. I just remember thinking, here we go, this whole situation, it really goes back about 4 years. Max was 14, Lily was 12, when Sarah and I divorced. But what nobody, and I mean nobody, knew was the real reason we split. Sarah had been having an affair with Robert, her coworker, for about 8 months before I found out. When I finally confronted her, she just looked me in the eye and said she was following her heart. Within a month, she was moved in with him. We tried to keep things civil for the kids, so we went through mediation, agreed to 50-50 custody. Sounded good on paper. But then, things started to shift. Sarah would cancel her weekends, first 4 trips with Robert, then for his work events. Slowly but surely, the kids ended up with me more and more. By year 2, I was probably having them 70% of the time. The kids noticed. Max, he got pretty resentful. He saw her prioritizing Robert over them. Lily, she was always more forgiving, but even she started making comments about Mom always being busy with Robert's stuff. By the 3rd year, it was almost like Sarah treated custody as optional. She'd take them for 2 nights instead of 3.5, or skip weekends if Robert had other plans. Max and Lily just adapted. They started assuming they'd be at my place most of the time, and honestly, it just naturally became their primary home. I never modified the custody agreement, you know? The informal arrangement just worked. And I really didn't want to stir up more conflict. The big shift, the really big one, happened about 18 months ago. That's when both kids started actively choosing to be at my place, even during Sarah's scheduled time. Max would text me, "Dad, I need my computer set up for this project, or can I work on this at your place?" Lily would say she'd made plans with friends to meet at my house. Looking back, I can see how Sarah probably felt like she was losing them. But I wasn't doing anything sneaky. I was just being a consistent parent. I went to every school event, every game, every parent-teacher conference. When they were sick, they wanted to be at my house, because they knew I'd be there, not juggling their needs with Robert's schedule. So, back to graduation. After the ceremony, everyone was out on the field, taking pictures. And that's when Sarah made her move. She pulled Max aside, but honestly, in that quiet lull after all the cheering, everyone could hear her. She started this whole speech, you know, about how much she loved him, how hard she'd worked to be a good mother, even when others tried turning him against her. And then she said it. She knew he'd been spending more time at my house, but she understood he'd been brainwashed and didn't blame him. You could have heard a pin drop. Our entire family, Robert included, just froze. But Max, he's 18 now. He's done with the drama. He just looked her dead in the eye and said, very calmly, "Nobody brainwashed me, Mom. I chose to be at Dad's because Dad was actually there. And he wasn't done. He said, if you wanted me around more, maybe you shouldn't have chosen Robert over your family 4 years ago. And maybe you should stop canceling whenever something better comes up." The air just left the stadium, I swear. But Max, he just kept going. He said, "Everyone deserves to know the truth about why you and Dad divorced, since you want to talk about brainwashing." He said he was tired of protecting her reputation when she'd never protected their feelings. Sarah absolutely lost it. Just lost it. She started yelling that Max didn't know what he was talking about, that I'd poisoned him, that she'd been nothing but devoted. Robert had to physically pull her toward the parking lot while she kept shouting. It was mortifying, yes, but there was this little part of me that felt vindicated. To finally have the truth out there, from Max himself. Lily wasn't at graduation, but she heard all about it from Max. She's been unusually quiet since. She's always been closer to her mom, and I know she's struggling with everything being out in the open now. I haven't heard from Sarah directly since, but Robert texted me later asking if we could talk like adults. Things have really escalated since then. Family members who were at graduation have been calling. My parents called, saying they were proud of how I'd handled everything, and admitting they'd suspected something was off about the divorce but never wanted to pry. My sister, Jessica, she was less diplomatic. She flat out said she'd noticed Sarah barely interacted with Max and Lily at family events for years. The bigger development, though, was Lily. She came to me, asking to talk. She'd spent years making excuses for her mom's behavior, you know? Because she just didn't want to believe her own mom would choose someone else over her and Max. But hearing Max say it all out loud, it made her realize she'd been lying to herself. Lily started listing all these heartbreaking examples, how Sarah would promise to help her shop for homecoming dresses, then cancel for Robert's work events. How she missed Lily's middle school graduation for a weekend getaway. The worst, she said, was when she called crying after a bad school day, and Sarah told her she couldn't talk because of date night with Robert and would call back later. Lily waited for hours, and the call never came. She ended up calling me instead. She just kept saying she convinced herself her mom was just busy, but Max laying out the pattern made her realize she'd been making excuses for someone who wasn't prioritizing her kids. She asked if she could skip her mom's scheduled time this week to just think. I texted Sarah, letting her know Lily was staying with me and needed time. She called me immediately, our first contact since the ceremony. She alternated between furious and desperate. She accused me of finally getting what I wanted, of turning both kids against her. Then she started crying, saying she knew she'd made mistakes, but she was trying to build a life with Robert and thought the kids understood adults need companionship. I just told her that the kids understood that, but they also needed a mom who showed up consistently. The conversation went nowhere. She hung up, saying this wasn't over and she'd talk to a lawyer about modifying custody because I'd been alienating the kids. Then, I met with Robert. That conversation was unexpected. He started by apologizing for Sarah's graduation behavior, which was a surprise in itself. But then he said something that really threw me off. He'd been trying to get Sarah to be more involved with Max and Lily for 2 years, but she kept making excuses about why she couldn't prioritize them more. Robert even said he'd noticed Sarah seemed almost relieved when the kids chose to stay at my place instead of coming to their house. The really shocking part was when he told me he'd been pushing for Sarah to fight for more custody time, not less. He liked Max and Lily and wanted them to be a bigger part of their life together. He told me that after Max's graduation speech, Sarah had a complete breakdown at home. She'd been crying for days, saying everyone hated her and her kids would never forgive her. But when Robert suggested she call them to apologize and make things right, she just said it was too late and pointless. He asked if I thought the kids would be open to family counseling with Sarah. I told him honestly that the kids were old enough to decide what kind of relationship they wanted with their mom, but Sarah would have to take real accountability instead of blaming everyone else. But the biggest development happened this morning. Sarah showed up at my house around 9 a.m., looking like she hadn't slept in days. She asked if she could talk to Lily. Lily said okay, but only if I stayed in the room. What followed was probably the most honest conversation Sarah has had with either kid in years. She didn't make excuses or blame anyone else. She told Lily she'd been a selfish mother and convinced herself the kids were better off with me because it was easier than admitting she didn't know how to balance her new marriage with being present for them. She said she'd been so focused on making Robert happy and proving their relationship was worth blowing up our family for that she'd forgotten her kids needed her to show up, regardless of what else was happening. She admitted she was ashamed of how she'd handled everything and that Max was right to call her out. Lily then asked why she blamed me and Max for brainwashing instead of just admitting she'd messed up. Sarah was quiet for a long time before admitting she was embarrassed and defensive and lashed out instead of taking responsibility. Lily asked if Sarah was only apologizing because everyone found out the truth, or if she'd been planning to change even if Max hadn't said anything. Sarah was quiet for an even longer time before admitting she probably would have kept making excuses. Lily told her she appreciated the apology but needed time to think about whether she was ready for a closer relationship again. She said she'd spent too many years getting disappointed and making excuses for Sarah's choices and wasn't sure she trusted that things would actually be different this time. After Sarah left, Lily asked me if I thought people could really change. I told her some people can, but actions matter more than words, and it was okay to protect herself while figuring out what she wanted her relationship with her mom to look like. I'm just trying to navigate all this. It feels like a massive weight has been lifted, now that the truth is out there, but it's also incredibly messy and painful, especially for the kids. I think Max and Lily are both relieved to finally have clear boundaries, but I hate that they're having to deal with this level of dysfunction from their own mother. It's tough seeing them hurt, but also empowering them to set their own limits. What do you think is the best way to support Lily and Max through this without alienating Sarah completely, especially when she seems to be finally showing some self-awareness?